Hey everybody, welcome back to Confidently Insecure, the podcast where we are absolutely sure we don't know everything. And today's guest is August McLaughlin, and she is a sexuality writer. She wrote the book Girl Boner. She also has a podcast called Girl Boner Radio, and it's all about the good girl's guide to sexual empowerment. This episode was so fascinating to record. August actually took part in an orgasm study at Rutgers University. She talks about how she masturbated for the first time at the age of 30, and we even talked a little bit about sexuality privilege. It's a very NSFW episode, but more educational than anything. You can watch this on YouTube at youtube.com/Kelsey Darragh and listen to this wherever podcasts are listened to. Enjoy this episode, August McLaughlin. Hey everybody, welcome back to Confidently Insecure. Today I have a very exciting and educational, I was trying to combine the words edutainment, educational, entertainment together, guest on the podcast. We have August. Jesus Christ. I've done three
no one's ever
episodes
said
today.
that. I actually kind of like it. August.
August.
It's like the August, like Craigslist, but August.
It's combining your first and last name. It's August McLaughlin. Thank you so much for being here. And I wanted to ask, how do you intro yourself? Because are you a sexpert? Are you a gyno who doesn't practice medicine? How do you introduce your work?
I usually say I'm a health and sexuality writer and host and creator of Girl Boner. And then people go like, well, what's Girl Boner? So then I go into all the layers.
What's Girl Boner?
So what's Girl Boner? I'm so glad you asked. So surprising. So Girl Boner is a term I trademarked a few years back because at the time, it's actually like 7 years ago, there were really no terms, universal terms for female sexual arousal. Mm-hmm. And my slang dictionary had a whole bunch for dudes. Yeah. And so Girl Boner had been like my own joke term since I was a kid. And I just decided to turn it into activism because I went through a lot in my own life, and embracing my sexuality helped me really thrive. So I trademarked it, started a blog series that led to the podcast about a year later. And then the books came out just last year and this year.
The purple one just came out last year?
This one came out in August, yeah.
Oh, wow. In August?
In August.
Is your birthday in August?
It's not.
Oh,
it's
mine
my
is.
grandfather's name. Oh, that's cool.
16th, Leo. Anyways.
Nice.
What's your sign, just to know?
I'm a Sagicorn. I'm a Sagittarius
cusp.
Capricorn cusp.
Okay, good to know. So the book she is referring to, if you are not watching on YouTube, is Girl Boner, The Good Girl's Guide to Sexual Empowerment. And I have to say, when you sent this to me, I was like, "Aye, bitch, what are you going to try and teach me? I am the sex queen. I know everything about it. I've done it, smoked it, fucked it, snorted it, bought the t-shirt. There's nothing you can teach me." And in about 30 seconds in, I learned so much. This is such a in-depth, partly personal look at female sexual empowerment. And I don't want to say female if that's not the right term.
No, you can use that for sure.
Okay.
I wanted to be a very inclusive book.
That's my first question. Why is the inclusivity language important to you besides the obvious, it's the right thing to do?
Right. It's interesting because when I first started, I thought with my blog, I thought I was going to attract women and I thought I was an inclusive person. Mm-hmm. I thought I'm accepting of LGBTQ, but I didn't realize how much I didn't know yet. Mm-hmm. And because I've learned so much, the biggest gift from my own journey with this work has been learning about all the shades of everything.
Yes.
And so for me, that's like number one, even though it is because of my own journey. Mm-hmm. I started from a place of overcoming shame around, like, you can't be a good girl and also be a sexual being.
Right.
Like, that's not supposed to happen. So I have a huge segment of my audience who identifies that way, but some of them are, femme or they identify as non-binary, but they have that background. And then the rest of my work is incredibly diverse as far as gender. And a lot of guys read my stuff, and I want everyone to feel welcome.
It does feel like something I wish I would have gotten my hands on in 5th, 6th grade. And that actually leads me kind of into my first round of questions that I want to talk about sex education. You have really good parts of your book talking about sex ed and sort of your experience with it. And you talk about at an early age, we learn in sex ed about what feels good for a man. And we never really hear about the opposition, and all we hear is how everything kind of sucks for chicks. You get your period, you get cramps, you have to have a baby. Like, we never hear that anything feels good for us. So how do we start teaching proper sex ed, and at what age do we feel like that's appropriate?
I love this question. I think it's really important to start at home as soon as a child asks a question. Kids ask questions when they're 2, 3, 4 years old.
I started humping pillows before I could talk.
Exactly. And you know what? That should be accepted,
Thank you.
And I think
Mom.
that, right? But the problem is there's all these like generational differences. So like our parents know less than we do. Our parents' parents knew less than our parents did.
Right.
And so, and we all learned that it's like secret and private, and that you should go, oh my God, never do that. You know?
My mom told me my vagina was going to fall off if I didn't stop masturbating, because she just didn't know what to do with me.
Right.
She was like,
She didn't learn
therapy
either.
didn't work. Like, she didn't know.
And she was probably imagining you'd be going around humping everything.
Everything.
You know? And it's
Yeah.
like, that's really normal, though, to want to explore your body. So answering the questions just with basic information that's factual.
Yes.
Not a hint of shame, even if inside you're like, oh my God, because we pass that on so easily.
So I think that's a really good point in talking about it factually that you say, because whenever I think of the birds and the bees, my stomach drops immediately, because there definitely was a lot of, I was raised pretty religiously, but like shame-based sensations when I think about opening up a sexual dialogue with someone older than myself. So talking about it factually kind of reminds me about the same way we say, like, don't talk to babies in baby talk voice. Just talk to them like they're humans or whatever. Like, just talk to them like they're adults. Do we need to start talking to kids about sex in a adult way sooner?
I would say in some ways, yes. In a way, not necessarily using cutesy little names, right? Because that's like more childish.
Your flower, your precious delicate. Like, what the? My pussy can take anything, okay?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Right. No, I am so with you there. We need to learn the actual terms. And then if you want to have your own nicknames, I think that's cool.
Yeah.
But they should be empowering ones. And
Yeah.
there's so many disempowering ones for anyone with a vulva, vagina. So, yeah, I think that aspect needs to grow up for sure.
And how do you feel about using the word pussy in the way that most kids do today? Like, you're being a fucking pussy, and we're like, the vagina is the most powerful thing on the planet, yet we use it in such a derogatory form. Do we need to like take back the word a little bit?
We do. I actually also want to take back cunt.
Oh,
Like,
I love cunt.
Love it. Yeah. Yes.
I love the word cunt. Let's start saying cunt more.
It's
in
so
a positive
powerful,
way.
and
Yeah.
that is the biggest insult for somebody
Right.
is so broken.
It's so broken.
Yeah.
I agree with you 100%. Going back to sex education, you talk about virginity being a social construct, that there's no scientific, this is one of the first things that blew my mind. There is no scientific or medical definition for virginity.
Nope.
What?
Totally made up. I mean, you can ask a bunch of different experts.
You're air quoting there.
Right. I'm air
Experts.
quoting because if you talk to somebody who knows the physiology of it, there is none. There is none. But if you talk to someone who's like part of a certain religion, they will say it's when you do this or when you do that. I mean, it's like, it's really just a judgment, and it's based on that kind of purity culture thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So do we need to, I'm trying to think of, we had a lot of people who wrote in that asked they themselves were virgins. And I wonder if we need to, do we take away the word virgin? Or is it helpful in some respects?
That's such a good question. It's so interesting. I don't think we really, I don't think we really need
We need
it.
to abolish the word.
I mean, right? I mean, because
Right.
it's unless you want to just own it for your
Yeah.
own self. But the thing is, it took me a long time to realize I was having sex before I realized I was having sex.
Right.
Because I thought having sex meant penis and vagina intercourse.
That's what you're taught.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I've met people who are really entrenched in that purity culture stuff where you learn very, very extreme things about like the fundamental ideas about gender and stuff. And it's very common for them to be very active in anal sex because they think that's okay.
Oh, so we really are just like misinterpreting, I think, a lot of religious rules, if you will, into now we're teaching it in like public schools for maybe people who don't even believe in that religion.
Completely. And I think at least as important as talking about what virginity means and whether there's a definition is our definition of sex.
go on.
Like, what does it mean?
Right.
So many people do think of it as intercourse.
And I was asked the other day, does oral sex count as sex because the word sex is in it? And I thought, what does sex mean to me?
Yeah.
And then it had me deep dive into, well, do I consider it orgasm? No, because sex can still be enjoyable without orgasm. I don't consider it penetration because I do have sex with genders unlike the opposite of mine. So do I consider digital penetration sex? Like, it had me swimming. Do you have an answer?
That is such a powerful question for us all to think about, because I think it varies for all of us, and I think we need to think about that more, because I think you can be having like mind sex. Like, I think our sexuality is like, it's in us. It's in the way we speak, and the way we hold ourselves, and the way we connect with people. It's very sensual. It's in the food we eat. So, I don't think we're all having sex constantly, but I do think that there's sex as something that you share with one particular person, especially with particular genitalia, is very limiting.
Yes.
But if we think of it as either something that is like, for me, it's something that's very sensual and orgasmic, whether there's an orgasm or not, orgasmic, either with another person or not,
by
like
yourself.
Just by myself.
Right.
And for the longest time, I thought I had to have another person there to like be sexual as a human.
Yeah. So I want to touch on what you mentioned a little bit. You said like for the longest time, and the first chapter in your book talks about how I want to get this right. I want to get the verbiage right. That you did not climax? What should I say? That you didn't.
I know what you're saying. Okay, so I now say experienced. So I had experienced many orgasms by then. I had never masturbated until age 30.
Until age 30. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be like, what?
No, you should be.
Holy shit.
Everyone should be.
Okay, you were having sex.
Oh, yeah.
And orgasming.
Yep.
But you weren't masturbating.
Correct.
Okay. Where usually the order of that is
the opposite.
So tell me about that.
Yes. It's not that common. It does happen. So others out there, I feel like a kindred connection.
No, my tone was definitely shameful.
Oh no. It was surprise, and I think that that's completely
societal,
okay,
yeah.
right? And if whether somebody's either way is okay.
Yeah.
But I did not even realize that I had shame around my sexuality. I knew that I consider myself kind of like naughty because I liked sex and because I grew up with a lot of religious beliefs about you can only have sex once you're married. I thought like it made me like kind of kinky because I had sex before I was married. Yeah, exactly. And so I didn't even realize that I had absorbed this message, and it was similar to the message that you heard about your I think it was your vagina. Yeah. I was in a bathtub, and my grandmother, who was a missionary, I was just touching around, and I'm like, what's in there? And her voice, she was the sweetest person. I never heard her sound evil or angry. She sounded so angry and like witchy, like just like Cruella-y.
Yeah.
And she was like, never touch that. And I mean, I'm probably remembering it not quite right.
No, but
that was my perception.
Certainly an impact.
Yeah. And I didn't really think about it, but it really got to me because once I had sex with a partner, I was like, this is great.
This is awesome.
I'll just have it whenever I want to with a person. And I even wrote a paper in college about
why
I don't need to masturbate. Yeah.
And tell me a little bit about what that essay could have possibly sounded like.
Okay. What I remember is that the main point was I had a partner who I could have sex with. We had pleasurable sex. So what was the point? Like, I literally didn't see why I needed to. My sex life was very gratifying,
right?
But it was very limited.
Right.
It was always the same positions. It was very like standard, here you go. And so it wasn't until when I was 30 that I was in a very wonderful relationship, long-term relationship, and my partner was away quite a bit. And I got really irritated and like feeling really depressed, and I was like, what is going on with me? One night I realized I was horny. It like dawned on me.
And that's what it was. So before you had done it when you were 30, had you tried, or were you just what would the shame arise when you tried to do it? Or did you just have such a disconnection with your own body?
I think it was a combination. One of the things though is, a lot of people who have vulvas really prefer the external stimulation.
Hello. Your girl's one of them.
Yes, exactly, which is super duper common.
Yeah.
I am much more internal.
Oh, so you are kind of like, I don't want to say rare, because you also talk about how we have to be careful using terms like that.
Oh,
like,
that's
to describe,
okay. Yeah, it's
like
not
only
common.
a certain percentage of women come on their backs, which I think is fucking crazy that anyone can come on their back, but I shouldn't say that. You do you, boo.
It's okay.
I'm learning.
Let it out.
I'm
Let
learning.
it out. Yeah. I am in a minority, I would say, for sure, of people who I tend to experience orgasm inside, and I orgasm through intercourse. Like that's like my
made sense
favorite.
For you. Yeah.
So if you're not, I didn't really think of putting anything in there. I mean, I would rub every once in a while, and it just was like itchy or made me want something more, which I thought had to be a penis. Yeah.
Interesting. So you detail it a lot in the book of the actual experience and how it changed you. What was it like, someone would consider that later in your sexual journey, especially after having sex for so long? How did that change you?
Oh, it was very emotional, and I felt like a teenager again. I literally felt like I wanted to do it all the time. I was driving somewhere, I had to teach a class, and I was like, oh, I really wanted to like pull a toy out.
Yeah.
Or like
I've definitely driven and masturbated on the highway.
While driving?
Oh, yeah.
I always feel like I would get into an accident. I had to pull over.
It was not smart.
Yeah.
But I did it.
We aren't recommending it, but.
But sometimes when you get in that spot, you got to scratch the itch.
It's true.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a great way to get through the traffic we have here, right?
Yeah, holy shit, it's bad.
You're sitting still anyway. So,
it's like it's not that dangerous.
Yeah.
Going back to the sex education, you talk about a law, or you talk about a study, or the woman that talks about a study of the law in '94 that the White House implemented about outlawing the teaching of sex ed and how that affected the way we still learn it today. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that was also
Elders.
Yes.
So she is incredible, and she essentially was pro masturbation. Like, we should be taught that masturbation is a safe form of sex because it is, and as you're, instilling all this fear in children and being like, if you sit on a toilet seat, you're going to have like fungus on your butt or whatever.
Right.
Like, you get these weird images in your head and you're afraid of everything.
Yeah.
And the fact that we will teach abstinence, which doesn't work as we know, but we will not teach that you can have your own autonomy. And especially for girls and people with vulvas, I think it's really important to know that we are very self-sufficient. And when you don't try to fulfill that void with a relationship that's not necessarily good, because that's what I would do.
Right.
Because I wasn't masturbating, I would just end up dating someone every time I was horny. Yeah.
When you say people with vulvas, for someone who maybe doesn't know what a vulva is, explain your terminology.
So a vulva is the whole external genital area for anybody who has a clitoris, and the vagina is the canal.
Right.
And what we hear is like the vagina is equivalent. I don't know what this was. I'm like making a sign language of a pole. But the vagina and the penis are not equivalents. The clitoris and the penis are equivalents, and they're actually about the same size.
Your diagram in your book blew my motherfucking mind because you showcased that the clitoris. See, even I'm like, what? The clitoris expands far past the button that we have been taught that it is. And especially when so many people joke about finding it, it's a little bit of everywhere. Can you sort of explain that diagram that I'm talking about?
Totally. And I love that you said that because it was actually really hard for me to find examples of diagrams for the illustrator.
Oh, wow.
I wanted an aroused clitoris diagram, and there wasn't one. I found like one image that was from someone's paper from a feminist studies program. That was it. So to show it engorged, to show that it gets that
larger,
size basically.
Right.
Yeah, so you see the little button part on the outside, and that is incredibly sensitive.
Right.
Like, but then there's like, it's almost like a wishbone.
Right.
It comes up, and the internal clitoris, when that gets aroused, it's incredible. And you can arouse it through kissing because all the blood flow goes down there, and the pleasure is just incredible.
And so it's even a little bit like the nerve surrounding that area. So even like the thighs, the upper stomach, like a little bit around the butt, like that whole area is just as pleasurable around what we think the clitoris is. I'm making air quotes, but man, this should be an episode for all people. I know I have like a largely, girl-based audience, but I think that when guys watch porn and they see this one thing being done and it's almost like an overstimulation. I remember when I didn't like it, I felt weird saying that I didn't like it because I thought that I was supposed to. And instead of being like, ow, holy shit, that's too much, I just kept letting it happen for years. And I just really didn't ever enjoy someone eating me out because I was like, no one knows how to fucking do it because no one knows how expansive it could be and how to incorporate all parts of it.
Completely. We didn't even name the clitoris in medical texts or know the anatomy of it until like a couple of decades ago.
Wow.
This is brand new stuff.
No
I mean,
shit.
People really did think there was just this
a little tiny button that like no one could find.
And that was undervalued too.
Right.
So it's literally, there were some medical texts that it was cut out of once it was in there. So you can imagine. Yeah,
Right.
it is important for us to know this.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about menage a moi, as you call it in the book, which is so fun. Another way that we call it masturbation in sex ed. I have a fan question from Danielle who wanted to ask, is pleasure something that should be talked about with young kids along with general sex, or should they figure it out on their own? Which I thought was interesting because I'm definitely someone who found it on my own and was just very exploratory before I got any educational information about masturbation. So how do we or don't we separate the talk of masturbation and sex at a young age?
I think it should be incorporated. I think it should at least be mentioned that it's a thing, because one problem is people start associating shame with pleasure. So if every time you feel pleasure, you go, oh, I wasn't supposed to feel that, then you will internalize a message of shame, and you might even start to feel like shame will be your turn on.
Whoa.
You know, I've interviewed people for whom that's the case.
I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
You just had, hold on, I just had like a mind-blowing GIF moment, but
it's wild, right?
you can start to have shame be your turn on.
Right. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, right?
Which
like
not,
if you're into like humiliation fetishes,
right.
which that's not where all of that comes from. I want to differentiate that a bit, because I don't feel that if you have that fetish, then, oh, you must have had shame.
No.
But for example, I interviewed a woman named Erica Garza who wrote a book about her experience with porn addiction. And she had so much shame around her porn use that like she needed more and more shame to get off. Like it became this cycle. And so you want people to feel comfortable with their bodies. So even just saying sometimes it feels good, like it might feel good, and that's okay as a private activity.
Right. So, and we're also saying that that should happen as soon as someone starts asking. So there really isn't like an age limit or starting age.
I think it is important to know that you don't have to like, I think the thought of talking to a child about pleasure is like terrifying for a lot of people.
Right.
I wouldn't really know how to go about like all those details, right? And I'm not a parent, but I do think that you can address it just again, the basic fact, like pleasure exists, like that they know it's there is good. And then if they have questions, then answer them. But you don't have to be like, well, then if you stimulate this part, you know, when they're 7,
and
you don't need to do that.
it's different from sex and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Got it. I loved the section in your book about consent, particularly the bit about consent where you were talking about asking someone to take off their shirt before, you know, just rip it off. And I found in times of passion when things are getting hot and crazy, I've seen in movies that that's like what's supposed to happen, you know, in The Notebook. Like every time I was having sex, I would be like, I need that moment of like pure, like raw emotion. But that made me stop and take pause, because I was like, oh, there definitely have been moments in my life where that has happened, right? The shirt has been ripped off. And instead of me going like, wait a minute, I've gone, oh, okay, I guess we're doing this now. And it's become part of the motion. Can you talk a little bit about, I feel like recently media has brought up the I don't want to say the issue of consent, the conversation about consent, and how is that, you know, you hear men saying like, oh, we can't fucking get away with anything, or we can't do anything anymore. But how do you hope the conversation around consent is changing and has changed?
It's so vital, and I think it has a bit of a heaviness for a lot of people when they hear consent. They go, "Oh, this is going to be like
this
boring.
A talk with
like a scolding or something."
Right.
Where really consent it's a mutual connection. It's a conversation, as you've said. So it brings more pleasure. It allows for more turn-ons, and most people, if they're good people, they care about their partner's pleasure, right?
Right.
So we want to know what feels good for our partner.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think if you think about it as something that is as essential as lube, like it's just something that is helpful,
Right.
and will only deepen the experience and make things hotter. It's not meant to like punish someone.
Right. And I think that's the difference is people think like, oh, all of a sudden I'm the bad guy because I have to ask if I'm doing something. It's like, well, no, if I'm giving you all the signals and like you said, it's a connection, that's hot.
Totally. It's way hotter. Yeah. And once you know, it's not like every single time you have to be, if you know your partner loves this, ripping off the shirt, then you can do that. I mean, there's a lot of ways to communicate, but just don't like assume everybody wants it.
And I think that's a difference between like sleeping with someone for the first time and, a connection that I have with my partner who I've been with for a long time is that the first time always feels a little bit like dipping the toe in the water. Yeah. And I feel like that can hinder people sometimes because we're not really sure how to have those very first conversations, those very moments sexually with people.
Yeah.
And I think I've said this on either this podcast or the last, but I dangerously realized that in all of the people I've ever had intercourse with, I've never for the first time done it with them sober. I've never had sex with someone for the first time sober. Maybe second time totally sober or, all the time sober now with my boyfriend, but even including my partner now and partners we have together, I always have had to be a little drunk.
That's so interesting.
It's fucked up is what it is, right? Like, and I think it's because when I have that little bit of liquid courage, I don't care if I need to ask about the herpes. I don't care if I need to ask about a condom. Like, I don't care. Like, I'm a little more unashamed to open the dialogue.
Yeah, that's so interesting because you're using something that's a bit of a coping thing, right? To do something really positive. And when we notice that we're doing something that we're like, that's really not the one I would pick, now the awareness is so big. Then you can go, what can I replace that with?
Right.
Is it that I have the vulnerable conversation and say, I've never had first time sex with somebody without alcohol. I'd like us to try this.
Right.
I'm kind of nervous, and can we go slow, or can we breathe first?
No, I love that. I love
you
that.
do a little sexy tantra video,
oh my God.
YouTube,
on
whatever.
YouTube. Yes, I was just about to say. We're super into that right now. Like just breathing with someone and touch is so important.
Right. And even if nothing else, you can be like, no penetration's happening today.
Ooh.
I'm gonna have sex with you. We're gonna share sex. We're gonna have this orgasmic experience, and if something else happens, great, but there's zero pressure. We're just going to be let's get to know each other's bodies and breathe and feel good.
I think that's something to be said too about guys who experience, I don't even like calling it erectile dysfunction because the word dysfunction puts such a negative connotation on it, but something I was speaking about with my sex therapist, I said that as if you are now my other sex therapist.
Oh, I'm so honored that you accidentally said that.
She was talking about how we put so much emphasis on the guy boner because it's something we can physically see, this rock hard appendage that sticks out from our body, whereas with people with vulvas, it's something very internal and very, I think that's why a lot of people with vulvas fake it is because it's not something that can be seen and we know we can kind of get away with it. I don't know why I said that, but it was just
it is an interesting thing.
Yeah.
I think you're right, and I think it's one of the reasons that it was sort of ignored for a long time and still is a lot of the times is because you can't see it. So it in that way it feels more mystical, but it's really not as complicated as we make it out to be.
Sure. Clitoral anatomy, we've talked about, expands beyond that button that most people know about. But what the fuck is a C-spot?
So the C-spot is a term I used for if you're experiencing orgasm by stimulating the cervix.
So the cervix is above the vagina.
Yeah. So have you ever had a toy or a large penis way up high and you're like, ooh,
and it hurts?
Yeah, it hurts a little. Sometimes it's tender, sometimes it affects people differently. So some people love it and it's a little the good pain, because the pain and pleasure centers are so close. Yeah, you're like, ooh. Or sometimes it's pure pleasure and some people are like, oh, that's too much.
Right.
But you can experience orgasm through that.
So there's a G spot, there's a C spot. Is there any more spots?
There's a P spot.
What's a P spot?
That's the prostate. So they call it the quote unquote male G spot, but the P spot.
And do women have that?
We have prostate glands, don't we?
Yeah, I don't know, do we?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's shift the conversation a little bit over to vaginal health.
Yes.
You talk a lot about pubic hair, and we've talked about on the podcast how that can be linked to porn, and we see porn a certain way, so we base like that's all we have to base what our vaginas should look, or our vulvas should look like.
Yeah.
And something that I had another mind blown moment was when you said the reason why most people with vulvas in porn are bare down there is because porn is a visually stimulating experience.
Yeah.
So they need to be able to see what's happening. It's more enticing for whoever's watching to see, so they shave it all off because it's just a better point of view.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons. Like, if you saw just this big mound of hair,
You can't
it's
tell
still
what the fuck's
sexy
going
if you know
on.
sex is happening.
Yeah.
But yeah, you need to see the details. And also, as you were saying earlier, it doesn't always look the way that would actually feel pleasurable. I think of it like a cooking show. You know how like they bring out the like perfect cooked meal
Right.
after they spent like 2 minutes cooking it.
Right.
If you actually made that, the whole place would be a mess and things are flying and all that stuff. I feel like porn is that way. It's all designed to be outward to the camera.
Right.
How can you do like clitoral stim outward to the camera? Like something's covering it.
Right. You can't see it.
Yeah, yeah. And then some people, the hair gets in the way if they don't like how it tickles or, you know, there's a lot of different reasons. But it's important that people know that they don't have to shave or wax. I mean,
right.
those things can be really painful. Like I went to pain-free or painless waxing once, which, by the way, is not a thing.
I was about to say.
Oh my gosh. And the first thing the person asked me was,
like an
did you
oxymoron.
take Tylenol? And I was like,
Oh,
why?
why?
It says pain-free waxing.
Oh God.
It was it was excruciating for me. And I just like, I don't really want to build up a tolerance to
Right.
that feeling good.
Right.
So I'm not doing it.
Right.
But bless you if you love it.
if
It's
you
great.
like it and if you can do it, great.
Do
But-
it, yeah.
But it blew my mind that I was like, oh shit. You know, it definitely does have something to do with the word you used in the book about how we like young. It's because it looks young too. Like there's definitely that.
Yeah, that really gets to me for
Yeah.
deeply personal reasons, but also because we're humans and we care, right? Like about the infantilization
Yes,
of
thank you.
things.
There's
And
no
so-
fucking way I would remember that
it
word.
drives me crazy.
Infantilization.
Yeah,
Okay.
the way that we sexualize children.
Right, right. And
I just
so-
don't think that's a good influence. To see
Yeah.
when I see bodies in porn that look like they're 12
Right.
or it completely freaks me out.
Right. And
Yeah.
it's sending the wrong message. And I think that's why when the first time I had a guy say like, oh my God, you shave everything? And I was like, well, yeah, that's what I'm supposed to do. And he was like, no, women have hair on their pussies. And I was like, oh, okay. And it kind of changed the way I thought about it, where it was like, if you're grown enough to be having sex, you more likely than not are growing pubic hair.
Right, because we grow pubic hair when
Right.
our bodies are changing and we're having
Right.
all those hormonal changes and pubic hair is also a turn on for a lot of people. Not necessarily everyone. Everyone's different, but it's interesting how we just assume if we just get rid of it all, like we all need to look like eggs and
Right.
like shiny, smooth.
Like slippery dolphins.
Yeah.
I love the term egg. That's really funny. Can we go into some fan questions?
Yes,
We had a lot
absolutely.
here.
Cool.
Her name is Sarah. I had weight loss surgery a few years ago at 20 years old and have lost over 100 pounds since. I feel hot sometimes now, but I swear I felt sexy more often and had a higher sex drive before losing weight. I feel like I had less pressure to look a certain way during sex because I wasn't trying to prove anything, just enjoying myself as a plus-size woman. I now oddly feel like I have to prove myself as a smaller person. I still feel big, sitting around 185 pounds, but I was never this self-conscious before when it came to sex and being sexual overall when I weighed 300 pounds. I just want to rediscover my old insatiable self and learn how to take what I want again. Any tips?
Wow, what a
loaded.
profound
Yeah.
question. It brings up so many good points. One being that we tend to think of body image struggles as, people who are larger in size are more prone to. Sometimes they're more confident and they're like, this is who I
Yeah,
am. And,
right.
we all struggle with this stuff.
Right.
It's a really tough one. I think that what she's doing with awareness is so big. Again,
Yeah.
once you know it is happening, then you can answer back. And
Right.
because I went through a really serious eating disorder, and one of the things that helped me with that mental talk that is so hard that most people experience whether you have an eating disorder or not, is to do like an inventory of the negative thoughts you have in like a day, which is really intense if you're struggling a lot. But then take a break and then go back and argue it all, even if you have to lie.
Ask for concrete proof.
Yeah, just decide to change it because you can. And I also find anger to be very empowering. Get really mad at like the societal messages because you should not have to feel that way.
Right.
I think getting really pissed off and being like, you know what, my rebellion is I'm going to embrace myself.
I love that.
Yeah.
I can totally, that speaks to me. I think another interesting part of her question deals with sex drive, which you talk a lot about in the book, which I love because I think when you do become a sexually empowered woman, and I definitely kind of identify as that, and then I just recently started like antidepressants and it's fucking with my libido and I'm feeling very broken and off and wrong. And I'm like, no, wait, I already got past the wokeness part. I'm already a sexually empowered woman, but now things are changing. And you talk a lot about sex drive and how to deal with changes. If you could just speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I love that you shared that because it's one of the most common side effects of a lot of different medications, and antidepressants being one of them, but it's usually not talked about as a quality of life issue, and it should be.
Right? Oh my God, quality of life. Absolutely.
Yes,
because
people
sex
say,
is...
do you have dry mouth?
Right.
Are you sleeping? What about, like, how is your sex life?
Right,
do you feel... I mean, if you are used to having a particular drive and you don't have that anymore, you grieve that.
Right.
And it's not always permanent. A lot of times it's temporary, but you should know that.
Right.
Someone needs to tell you that.
Right. And I think the part that is the hardest for people who wrote in asking about sex drive is that they're worried like they've lost it and it might never come back. And it becomes something they ruminate over when they're in the sexual experience.
Yes.
And do you have any advice to, I mean, it's definitely something I'm asking personally too, perhaps I always thought, well, okay, maybe I need to take the pressure off of intercourse with my partner and just enjoy the experience. It doesn't have to equal orgasm, but also I always assumed I would be able to orgasm from masturbation. And so having to redefine also what masturbation means to me has been, very interesting.
Yeah, there's so many different layers to this that are all really valuable. One is those disruptive thoughts.
Yes.
And this applies to many different things, but certainly sex drive, it's a huge one.
Yeah.
Because regardless of the cause, we start judging ourselves and going like, I'm supposed to feel more turned on, or we just genuinely miss being so turned on, and then we're like, what is my partner thinking? And what are,
and then the boner's gone. The
girl
boner is gone.
It's a boner buzzkill for sure. Yeah. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge that you're having these thoughts and give yourself some grace to go like, that's a normal thing. I mean, it's not something to just let go and just go like, oh, this is how I am. But it also is something to practice self-compassion.
Yeah, and I think it also made me have to check in a little bit with my sexual privilege of like, I am someone who has been able to, has never had problems with my sexual experiences really, and that I've gotten to 28 before having like a dip in my libido. I feel very grateful, and I think we don't talk enough about the people who are, unable to orgasm or can't reach that experience or can't have sex or have painful sex or even asexual and don't know that yet, and it's all shame-based a little bit. So you talk a little bit about checking your sexual privilege in the book.
Yes, and you're the first person to ask me about it.
What?
And whenever I talk about this book, it's one of my favorite topics.
Yeah.
Like literally, I think
oh my
you're
gosh,
the first
talk
one.
as much as you can about it. It was so
I think
intriguing.
it's so important, and I love what you said about noticing your own privilege because I relate to that. Like I felt like as soon as I was like really sexually empowered, I'm like, I got this, and I thought everyone could switch that on and go like, now that I got it, I'm going to be very orgasmic, and that's not the case.
No.
Some people go for decades without realizing or learning how to experience orgasm. So I think that's really important to check our privilege in all different facets of life, but to know that inevitably our sexuality and our levels of privilege interact. For example, if you're a Black person, you might be very fetishized. You are very fetishized in a lot of different porn, for example. Or there's pressure on Black men who have penises to be like, oh, they must have the biggest penises.
Right.
And that's a terrible. It's not even fact-based, right? But then it's also puts all this pressure and self-consciousness, and there's this idea that if you're very masculine, you're not going to be self-conscious.
Right.
So then you can't even and process it.
Right.
So it affects us in so many ways. I wrote about Ducky Doolittle, who's this amazing sex educator, and she grew up an orphan. And so her entry into sex education was, she was like shocked that she'd go into these stores and these sex positive places and everyone's like, woohoo, orgasm. And she's like, not everyone can have safe sex if they can't afford condoms and they don't have health care. So just recognizing that, I think, and practicing gratitude and mindfulness around it as you're doing, I think is really big.
I think that's also interesting because I was going to say, well, what do I do with that privilege, right? Because it's not exactly the same as amplifying marginalized voices in a subject about like Black Lives Matter.
I have orgasm privilege, everybody.
Right? Like, is there? Well, maybe that's part of my question is. In part of your book is that it is a little bit of a journal in a way where you're able to fill out sections and you give little exercises, and you've actually just come out with the Girl Boner Journal, which is a guided journal to sexual joy and empowerment, which this looks like I cannot wait to take this home tonight. Is there something to opening up the dialogue, creating sort of like a book club-esque, group of friends to talk about this kind of stuff? Because otherwise we're internalizing it all. And like you said, what good is that doing? So what can we do with our sexual privilege?
Yeah, I think that's really important to have conversations. And if you're not comfortable talking to someone, or again, that's a privilege to have spaces to talk about it, have people to talk about it who are going to feel comfortable. If you live in a small town and everyone's like, oh my God, you said sex. We're lucky that we live here, that we are in a country that we have freedom to generally talk about this stuff in some spaces. But yeah, I think journaling is really powerful because it allows you to express yourself and explore without shame. Shame might come up, but you're not thinking, oh, this person's judging me and I don't know. And so that's really big. And then understanding if you do have certain sexual privileges, it also means your partners may not. So you may have a partner, any gender, any genitalia, who does not experience orgasm easily. Don't assume that everybody does. Don't assume that everybody has tried all these different things and is on the same page with you.
That would be so rare.
It would be, right? Just all of a sudden. It's important to just have conversations.
You met your perfect match now. And sex changes too, right? Like we talk about this honeymoon phase in relationships where at the beginning you're just like going at it like rabbits, and then I've seen a TED talk that says like scientifically when men get in relationships, their mind tricks their dicks into not producing as much like chemicals so that they don't fuck as much. Like, what the fuck? Like, what does that even mean? Like,
there's so many crazy myths out there that get turned into perceived fact. And they used to just enrage me, and I'd be stomping around, and now I have outlets to
like
talk,
Girl Boner Radio. Let's go to another fan question here. Veronica asked how to deal with internalized slut shaming, subconscious societal restrictions and judgment, which I think is such a fascinating question.
I love this question.
Because while we get the outward slut shaming, what about a little bit of the internal slut shaming?
I mean, most of us have, right? I know there was a time when I would shame women who were like dressing really sexy for Halloween. You're like, how come they're all so...
Like, they're hot bees. Bees aren't hot.
Or that they had plastic surgery to have very large breasts or something. And I think what happens is our sense of femininity and our own attractiveness gets threatened because we're like, oh, I'm not that. Like, that person cheated somehow. I mean, it's not rational, but it's a very human thing. And I think, again, that self-compassion of going, okay, this is the society that I'm in, and it really sucks, and how can I change that? So checking in with yourself is really big, noticing it and stopping yourself and changing. The other thing is speaking up when other people do it.
Ooh, yeah. Oh, that's huge for me. That's huge for me, especially with... I try to limit my hangout sessions with straight white males these days, but they're around still. And I am almost always the only person who speaks up when a guy is, talking about a bitch he's going to fuck tonight. And I've had to check my boyfriend with his group of friends, and he's sort of become this little internal messenger for me when there have been moments where that I'm like, you need to fucking say something when they talk that way about women. Do you have any tips or advice for young girls or men or not that how do they stand up in moments like that? Because it can be like, oh, well, then you're being like the little bitch of the group, or like you're soft because you respect women.
Right, exactly. I think one thing to keep in mind is that having someone say to you, "Oh, you're such like a wuss," or they'll say you're a pussy or use some other demeaning, more shaming word, is not as bad as what we are experiencing as a result of it. Like, if you can make one positive change, and there are other dudes for sure in that group who are sitting there sweating a little bit because they feel crappy. They're like, I can't believe I'm not saying anything. I can't believe they're saying that. It only takes one person to say one darn word. And all you have to say is something really simple usually, like, come on, guys, that's not cool. Walk away. Or just walk away. I mean, you just don't, standing there and taking it, like silence is almost perpetuating the problem.
It's complacent as hell.
Yeah.
Kim wanted to know, why are there so many sex toys for girls or people with vulvas? I would also like to use a toy on or with my male partner.
I love toys so much. So there are a lot of toys, I think, because there's so many ways to experience pleasure. So that's a really good thing. And there's such a variety because we all have different bodies. We all experience pleasure in different places in different ways. Most toys can be used for, we hear vibrators are only for like vulvas, vaginas. That's not true. So there, as you know, I can see.
I sure do.
Yeah. No, couples vibrators are awesome. Even vibrators get all the attention.
Right.
They're not my favorite.
Same.
What's your favorite?
Can I be honest? My hand. Honestly.
That's a good choice.
And I loved when you talked a little bit about your MRI experience too with being on your back, because I thought everyone masturbated on their stomachs. And then, like, when I would get around my group of girlfriends, they'd be like, what?
Really?
And I'm like, wait, you got what? Like, we were sharing experiences. But honestly, my hand has been, she never fails.
I love that. I love that so much. I wish that everyone could embrace that. I think we can,
Yeah, but I think there's something, talking to, Kim who asked this, there's something so fun about going to a sex toy store together too. Yeah. Like, even if you're kind of like little teenagers in the aisles, like, oh my God, what the fuck?
Totally.
Like, exploring it and just being open to, we'll find the weirdest looking thing on the wall sometimes and be like, let's go home and figure this shit out. It can be fun.
It can be so fun. And if you're intimidated by the store, then shop online. Usually they send things very discreetly and all that. The only thing about online is the size can be very distorted. I've ordered dildos that are like, oh my gosh, how am I going to fit that inside me? So really looking at the inches is important.
Yes.
But I personally love, for me, I like dildos. They don't vibrate, and I'm internal, right?
So that makes sense.
So it makes a lot of sense. But a lot of people, if you love the clitoral stim, the womanizer, which has a terrible name, but it's great, right?
But we've talked a lot about that toy. Yeah,
I recommend that too. And the wand is also very popular. So those are more for external. But variety is big. Yeah. And cock rings are amazing.
And the vibrating cock rings, because then it's something that you can enjoy too. There are couples toys out there.
Yeah,
Just do research.
So many people orgasm more quickly with toys. So if you're somebody who is like, I'm not really in the mood right now, and it takes me 20 minutes and takes my partner like a second to get turned on.
Oh, interesting. That's
Put the toy in even before you start. Like, that's one of my things I recommend to people who are like, it takes me so long. But usually it's because they were in their head all day and they're like stressed out.
And you have to separate.
Yeah. But if you put a little like, any kind of internal toy or a little vibrating panties or something, by the time you get to it, you're like almost ready to explode. Yeah.
I want to end on asking about your experience with the MRI. So in your book, you talk about how you were a part of an orgasm study. Just tell me the story with that.
Yeah, so you can imagine, I went from never having masturbated, written papers about that, and then it became such a passion of mine. And so I found out that they were doing these orgasm MRI studies at Rutgers University, and I thought, oh my gosh, how could I ever get to be so lucky? I was like envious that I hadn't been picked. And then I ran into one of the scientists at an event, and I thought it was like fate or something that he said I could come and do this. When in reality, it's very hard to get people to sign up.
Really?
But I was thinking like, oh my gosh, they picked me. It was probably like anybody.
Why did you want to do it so bad?
I get off on knowing what's going on in bodies. Like, I love medical tests, are the ones that don't hurt.
Yeah.
I like
so fascinating.
I'm so fascinated by the body. The brain fascinates me. Getting plugged into things, I don't know, it turns me on. And so there's that. And then also because of this passion around masturbation, I was like, I want to go all in. Like, I need to do this. And because I'm very outspoken about things, I wanted to be able to write about it. So I think I was the 4th or 5th journalist to do it.
Wow. And what exactly are they studying, or what are they trying to find?
In this case, they were studying what happens in the brain during arousal and orgasm and the factors they were testing were with clitoral stim, like you were actually touching yourself, and then they used one of the control factors was that you would imagine touching.
Wow, okay.
Which turned out to be just as powerful.
I was about to say, what was the results of that you found out?
Yeah, and nipple stimulation, same thing, and also regardless of gender. So it was interesting because we really
regardless of gender with the nipple stimulation.
Totally.
What?
Yeah. Fantasizing and touching or thinking about having them touch. They're very erogenous for a lot of people.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about what the process was like. You actually had to be in an MRI machine. You had to masturbate in front of doctors. Or did they leave you alone?
They weren't actually like watching. So what happened, because have you seen Masters of Sex or read?
No.
Okay. So I had this vision of like, I for some reason thought I would be able to just be hooked up to things like electrodes and just go at it in any position I wanted, which is not how MRIs work. And so I was reading the fine print and my contract and stuff on my way. Like, I'm in the plane, it's coming up in 2 days. And I was like, oh, I should have read this earlier. I should have practiced because you have to, I was on my back. I had this weird mask that looked like a colander holding my face and head in place.
And you couldn't move.
Couldn't move. I could barely, you could move your hand to touch yourself, but if you moved too much, if your head moved at all, you would mess up everything. And so I'm like, okay, this is not going to work. I'm not going to be able to help you. Yeah. And it was really interesting because when I told them that, I like fessed up, like I'm ruining all of this and your time and your money. They said, it's just as helpful if you don't experience orgasm, which relaxed me because when we take the pressure off, that's what happens.
Exactly.
And then he also, the head scientist said, would you like to try it with a toy? And I'm like,
ding, ding, ding.
So I brought my trusty dildo. Yes. I got one just for this experience, which I still love and use.
It's still like a special one on your nightstand.
It's my very special one.
Like in a frame.
It's purple. But yeah, so I got to experience this twice. And it was, they also told me that when they were putting me in, because I'd never had an MRI, they said some people realize they're claustrophobic once they're in there and they start having a panic attack. So if that happens, hit the button, you'll go flying out. I was like, this is getting less and less romantic.
Yeah, not what you thought it was going to be.
No, but the scientists were like on the other side of glass and I was fully in the machine. So they could hear everything. So like if you're grunting or moaning or whatever, they'd hear that. But they couldn't, they weren't watching or anything. And it was actually kind of like soothing in there. It's like a little cocoon and you're watching these slides in front of your face tell you to do different things, and it actually was incredibly arousing because it's very slow moving, and you're fantasizing and touching a little and fantasizing, and I didn't even realize that I had. Okay, so you know how I said I'm an internal orgasmer, so this was all a clitoral stim. So again, another thing I hadn't done, and I thought I had not had any orgasms that way. But what ended up happening was I felt this like mild, quote unquote, mild release. Sure. So when the scientist asked me, I thought I was just done because I'm like, I'm not getting anywhere else. But I'm like, I felt this releasey thingy. Yeah. And then I finished and he said, did you orgasm? And I was like, and I was wet and I was swollen and like I had totally come. But I had been writing off these fluttery orgasms on the outside as like not a thing.
Because unless your experience is like big, giant, I'll have what she's having moment, then we're like kind of writing it off.
Yeah, which I felt so bad. I was like, I never loved those.
I think it can all tie back to like how we think of what sex is and what success with sex looks like. And it doesn't always have to be that big moment.
Totally. Yeah. That was one of the takeaways, I think, because now I really do embrace those. Yeah. It's
so important. Are you written about somewhere like in a book at Rutgers or
finally in college? Yes. No, there's my results were part of a study, so
cool.
they don't name everybody. But then I wrote about it for Cosmo, and then it's in my book. And I interviewed Dr. Komisarek and Nan Wise, the two researchers who are amazing. It's very hard for them to get these studies approved because people are like, you're having sex on campus.
Sure.
I'm like, there's a lot of sex on campus, and you don't got to worry about this.
This is under the guise of...
Right. And you're by yourself.
Right.
It's like, yeah, anyway.
Wow.
It was amazing.
So can you tell people, please, where they can get Girl Boner? Because I'm loving going through it, and I can't wait to finish it. And I've got so many dog-eared pages. And now I got the journal.
Yay. Thank you so much. So they're available most anywhere books are sold. They're both on Amazon. And you can also find all the links at augustmclaughlin.com or girlboner.org.
And then you also listen to Girl Boner Radio?
Yeah, so my podcast is Girl Boner Radio, and interview all different sorts of people about sexual empowerment. Share a lot about my own life, as I know you do too, and we have a lot of fun.
And anywhere on social media they can find you?
Yeah, if you search hashtag Girl Boner, pop up everywhere.
Go everywhere.
That pop up everywhere just makes me like,
Think of a boner.
I'm watching myself just like, the boner comes out of your screen.
Right. I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kelsey.
Fucking fascinating.
So fun being here.
Awesome.